So I'm going to start with a little comic. This comes from a web comic called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, which sometimes has, I don't know, amusing economic things. So I'll do the lame thing. I'll read it aloud. And these two people are having kind of a philosophical or ethical discussion. Yes, Stephanie.
I just have a housekeeping question. I was wondering, I saw in your email about the test being April 4th this weekend. I know for many people that is a holiday.
Okay. Just a second. So continuing, back to this cartoon. Two men having a philosophical discussion. Man number one: if you were in a burning building, you could either save an elderly woman or the Mona Lisa. Which would you save? Person number two: oh, that's easy. The market has already spoken. The Mona Lisa is worth at least 872 times the value of a human life. And man number one, you know, maybe isn't satisfied with that answer, so he says, right, but if you were actually in that situation, what would you do? Man number two, I love this answer. Bidding war. If the lady's family is willing to pay more, from my perspective, they have equal value. So, of course, I wouldn't have owned the painting later, so a substantial discount might. Okay, this is actually, in my opinion, a great way to handle things. Here's a trade off between valuable piece of art with cultural significance versus grandma's life. How do we establish which is actually worth more? A bidding war. Let people tell us how much grandma is worth by saying, we'll pay $5,000 to save grandma. And the museum counters with, oh, no, the Mona Lisa is worth at least $6,000. We'll pay you $6,000 to save the Mona Lisa. Okay, and then, grandma's family counters with, oh, $8,000. And they keep bidding until we figure out who really has higher value, the painting or grandma. Anyhow, okay, so going back, person number one then raises morality. Okay, but what would be the good thing to do? And person number two says high yield savings account. The interest alone would be, okay, then we go back to person number one. I'm asking how you can compare the value of a great piece of art to that of the life of a human being. So person number two, okay, you'll have to use what are called fractions. And then at this point, economists are banned from philosophy. Okay, I love this cartoon because first I totally get the perspective of this economist person. He's exactly right about everything he says here. So clearly I've been indoctrinated or something. This is sort of the way that we think, that there are trade-offs between values of different things, and sometimes we have to put a value on people's lives in order to make decisions. And this was the discussion that we started on Tuesday about the value of life. And we need to make value of life comparisons. We have to make decisions where there's a trade-off between something that has monetary value versus lives. For example, I think I started with like safety questions. Okay, there are different safety issues. Highway safety. There might be a dangerous area of the highway, and the government could spend money to make it safer. But how much should the government spend? What's a reasonable amount to spend to make the road safer? If we can save a life by spending $100, is it worthwhile? If we can save a life by spending $100,000, is it worthwhile? $100 million? We have to draw a line somewhere, right? And when I put that question out, probably many of you in your minds, it's like, well, yeah, if it's $100 to save a life, obviously worthwhile. And then when I put forward 100 million, you start thinking, well, that's getting expensive. That's the kind of thinking that we have to do to make decisions about safety. Another example is medical care. how much should we be willing to pay to extend a person's life, to save a person's life? And again, these are questions that have to be answered. You know, if grandma has heart disease and the solution to her heart disease is a surgery costing $200,000, should, grandma, or well, should we pay that? And there are different questions of who is we. Would grandma be willing to pay $200,000 to save her life? Should the government be willing to pay $200,000 to save a person's life? An insurance company? Again, this is something that insurance companies, as well as government healthcare programs like Medicare in particular, they have to make these decisions. And the big one right now is the economic damage of the COVID pandemic, right? With this pandemic, we have had these economic lockdowns, or well, the lockdowns and restrictions on economic activity, businesses being closed, operating at limited capacity, bars and restaurants, movie theaters, gyms, all of these things have been restricted. And there are two things. The benefit is, of course, it saves lives. The cost is economic damage. Okay, people lose income. And as I've said before, we have to make a decision of, we as a society have to make a decision how much we are willing to pay, how much economic damage we are willing to accept in order to save lives. Okay, so, for example, about a year ago, COVID was brand new. We were starting these lockdowns. And the epidemiologists were predicting that there could be 2 to 4 million COVID deaths without any action, without any intervention. Okay. By the way, these forecasts that were coming out early in the pandemic that you heard maybe that you heard maybe February, March, April, May into June, they have been remarkably accurate. Throughout, the epidemiologists have been coming up with predictions that have come close to true. Now, of course, this 2 to 4 million deaths, that hasn't happened because they're talking about deaths without any interventions. And we have intervened. We've had the economic lockdowns, we've had the masks, we've had social distancing, and we've ended up with 500,000 deaths. Okay. Anyhow, so it seems that these lockdowns have saved, somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 million lives have been saved. Okay. With economic damage in the trillions of dollars. Maybe $4 trillion cost to the economy. Okay. It's something that's actually hard to assess. It's hard to assess. The simple way to do this would be to look at the U.S.'s gross domestic product in 2020 compared with 2019. That's a simple way of doing things. And we see that productivity went down, but we don't in fact know how much of that is due to the pandemic's lockdown measures and how much is due to just the pandemic itself. The restaurant industry, or well, let's say the cruise ship industry and other travel industries were hit hard by the pandemic. But it might not be that the damage to, again, the cruise ship industry is caused by the lockdowns and prohibitions on travel. It's that people wouldn't want to travel anyhow. So it's not clear that the lockdowns are the cause of the problem, of the damage anyhow. But saying that the damage caused by the lockdowns um, is in the area of $4 trillion, which is a lot of money, but that's probably reasonable. Okay, question is, was this decision worthwhile? Okay, you know, we save lives, but we at a cost. Okay, so these are the types of things where value of life calculations are necessary. So then it's important to establish whose life to whom. Okay. When we're talking about the value of life, whose life are we talking about, and the value to whom? Okay? So, the experiment that I usually do, and I think I did this on Tuesday, I pick a couple of people from class, right? Did I pick people? Okay. And who were they? What? Allie. Okay. Allie, who's not here in person. Okay, I mean, well, I'll pick a couple other people. You are William, and over here in this corner, Garrett. What? Justin. Okay, Justin, how much are you willing to pay to save Garrett's life? Garrett has a disease. Um, by the way, do you all know each other? Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Um, and you just told me that. Sorry, William and Justin. Justin, right? You're Justin. You're William. I apologize. Oh, okay. So William has a disease. Okay. And he set up a GoFundMe account asking for donations to cure his disease. Okay. And he's out of like all other options. He still needs money. How much would you be willing to contribute to Justin? So, how much would you be willing to contribute to his GoFundMe account to save his life? $5, $100, $1,000, $100,000? 10. Okay. Now, what if I told you, like, put your money where your mouth is? I'm going to find some random person who's raising money for a life-saving medical intervention on GoFundMe. Would you actually spend $10? Okay. Okay, and being an Elon student changes things. That's acceptable. Um, okay, uh, you know, but then I often ask the question of like, well, what if it's a random stranger, someone you have no connection with? You know, I I think the general answer is for most people, the value of an unconnected stranger's life is approximately zero. Okay, is approximately equal to zero. Okay, this is the way people behave. They do approximately nothing to save another person's life. And most, I would say, is sort of passively letting people die through inaction. We could donate money. We could donate blood. We could learn CPR. We could sign up to be an organ donor. All of these things we could do these things that potentially save lives, but many of us don't. Okay? But it's different when it's someone who's connected with us. Okay, and the reason I would suggest that you that most people place almost no value on another person's life is, what do they get out of it? It makes no difference to them whether the other person lives or dies. It has no impact on their life. Okay, which to me, as an economist, I think that people are fundamentally self interested. It is kind of I mean, going off on a little aside here, economists do think that people are fundamentally self-interested. That's part of that sort of rule number one of our analysis. But self-interested can be more broadly defined. It's not that I'm purely interested in what happens to me. I might also be interested in other people's well-being because it brings me happiness. So acts of altruism, like when I do something nice for another person, I do it for selfish reasons. It makes me feel good, or it makes me feel less guilty. Okay, I buy an ice cream cone for my kids. It's an act of kindness, but it makes me happy that they are happy. Okay, so that's the perspective that most economists have on people's behavior. People, for the most part, serve their own self-interest. Again, their self-interest might include the interest of others or the well-being of others. Okay, but then if that's true, like the value we place on someone else depends on what we get from them. Okay, that's why I emphasize here an unconnected stranger, and also William, right? You brought up the fact that it makes a difference that Justin is another Elon student, right? You'd be willing to pay more to save the life of an Elon student. That brings you more value. That's fine. That can be consistent with your preferences. And again, it's this sort of connection that we sometimes have. And when I say whose life, I hope you get like that. This is why, or well, what I'm trying to get at is not all people's lives have the same value to you. Okay, if this were a question of how much would you donate to save your mom's life, you would possibly say quite a bit. Okay, more than the $10 that William was willing to pay to save Justin's life. He would probably pay more to save his mom's life. Why? Because perhaps he gets more out of that relationship. Okay, unless he hates his mom and then gets nothing from that relationship, not willing to pay anything to maintain that relationship. Okay, now, so complete stranger, we get approximately nothing from that relationship. A fellow Elon student, we get a little bit from the sense of community. What else? Okay. What about the value of my life to you? Okay. Do you get anything out of the relationship with me? Okay, Stephanie says yes. That's very nice. Okay, what do you get out of the relationship? An education, right? Yeah. I make your world a better place. My life is worth something to you, or I make your world a better place again by educating you about economics. How can we assess that value? Well, you pay me for it, don't you? Okay? If you pay $1,000 to take this class, in fact, you doubtlessly pay more than that. If you pay $1,000 to take this class, that indicates that what you get from this class is worth at least $1,000. Okay, so here's one way of valuing a person's life to others. Value of my life to you. What you pay me is a way of approximating that value. And here is maybe a more general thing. The value of a person's life to society, okay, to other people, is approximately reflected by their lifetime earnings. Okay, earnings are a measure of what we do for other people. It's not a perfect measure. This leaves out non-market behavior. Um, and the love that your mommy gives you is like a non-market thing. You don't pay your mommy for that love. Um, and likewise, your mom. Let's see. Your mom doesn't. Wait. Likewise, you don't charge your mom for hugs. Though if you were a good economist, you could. Mom says, "Hey, give me a hug." You can be like, $3. Mom's like, "No, that's too much. $2." And you're like, "Okay, great." You give each other hugs, and your mom has paid you for the value of that hug. I mean, in principle, we could do things this way, right? Now we don't in some contexts, like families, but you understand how, like, in principle, we could charge people for all the services we provide to them, and they pay us in exchange what the service is worth to them. And so the value of one person's life to the rest of society can be approximated by their lifetime earnings. Okay, so this is called in economics the human capital approach. Human capital approach to measuring the value of life. And okay, human capital is a term that we have for skills that a person has, like their skills, abilities. Human capital is a generic term for that. So we call this human capital. The value I bring to society is based on my skills. And let's see. And so, let's see. What do I have to say about this human capital approach? Again, it is that earnings equal value to others. Okay, and that's the very simple description of this. Okay, so this would imply that different people's lives are worth different amounts, and when we think about decisions, like how much is it worth to save someone's life, one thing that it would suggest is that the lives of wealthy people are worth more. Okay, we should do more to save the lives of wealthy people. So the person that I miss, my hero who is gone, is a guy named Steve Jobs. Okay, you recognize the name Steve Jobs? Okay, one of the two founders of Apple, the head of Apple for many years. Okay, he's gone. He died of cancer. Now, along the way, he got some special medical treatment that other people couldn't get, and he skipped forward in waiting lists because he was rich. Okay, is that appropriate? Is that ethical? I would say absolutely yes. Okay, sorry. Within this lecture, my answer is absolutely yes. Um, uh, the fact that he's wealthy reflects what he has done for society. Who right now is using a product that came from Steve Jobs' company, an Apple product? Okay, that's virtually all of us. Yeah, I'm using two of them simultaneously. I have two iPads going here. Um, and if you're not using an Apple product, realize that Apple really pioneered laptops, pioneered Wi-Fi, pioneered smartphones, pioneered tablets. Like Apple was the company that really brought these things to market in a way that consumers enjoyed them. Okay, so Steve Jobs, I believe, brought a lot of value to society. And he became wealthy because of that. Or, another example, the wealthy person that people love to hate right now is Jeff Bezos, right? Okay, Jeff Bezos became wealthy through creating Amazon, right? I love Amazon. Amazon is the best thing ever. Who here uses Amazon for stuff, right? Almost all of us. Who's used Amazon in the past week or so? I get daily shipments from Amazon. It has really changed the way that people shop. You can get anything within 2 days or so delivered directly to you. It used to be back in days of yore before Amazon, you were limited to purchasing only the things that were in your local physical shop. When it came to things like books or music, the selection at the local bookshop could be pretty limited, or the selection at the local record shop could be pretty limited. And this is where Amazon got its start. It's like, hell, we can just buy lots and lots of books, and we have the entire selection of books, and we'll mail the books to you. Like, we're not limited by needing to purchase a shop in your hometown to make the books accessible to you. We will mail them to you. Amazon did a great job of revolutionizing shopping. And Jeff Bezos' wealth reflects the success of his company. I was reading a little while ago, a couple years ago, about the first, in Germany, the first immigrants in Germany to become billionaires. Okay. Okay. Germany is a country that struggled with immigration and accepting immigrants. All countries have this problem. U.S. is not alone in the conflict with immigrants. And Germany has its own issues, especially with immigrants from Turkey and the Middle East. So these people are Ugur Sahin and Oslan Turchi. Okay. Basically, from nothing, they started with no wealth, no inherited wealth, immigrated to Germany, and became billionaires. Okay, now, but, I make this claim that the wealth of people reflects what they bring to society. In fact, these people, their net worth has doubled in the past year. Okay, does anyone know who they are? Of course not, right? Okay, they started a company called BioNTech. Okay, does anyone recognize this company's name? Yeah.
Yeah, they worked with Pfizer to develop the.
Yeah. They are responsible for the first I believe, the first COVID vaccine to be accepted in the U.S. Right? That they worked with Pfizer. This is the vaccine that we often call the Pfizer vaccine. They did the sort of science behind that, but they didn't have the ability to run large trials. They didn't have the ability or the money to run large trials, and do all the I don't know, all the regulatory work, and the manufacturing of drugs. So they partnered with Pfizer to do that part of it. These people are the brains behind the Pfizer vaccine, in other words. Okay, um, and for that, they like their net worth has increased by about $2 billion. Okay, is that fair? Do you think they've brought $2 billion of value to society? Absolutely yes, right? They've done a marvelous job for society. They're being underpaid for that. I mean, and so sort of think back, what should society be willing to pay to save the lives of people like this or Steve Jobs? And my answer is those people bring a lot to society and their lives are worth more to society. Okay, so okay, here, husband and wife team behind the leading vaccine to solve COVID-19. I love the fact they're a husband and wife pair. They bicycle to work from their apartment, which is just a few blocks away from their lab. Okay, and they're billionaires. They're some of the wealthiest people in Germany now because of like their contribution to society. Okay, so I'm going back to value of life. We've established one way of measuring the value of a person's life to others. And that gets used in some cases like wrongful death lawsuits. If one of your family members dies and it's someone else's fault, you have the ability to sue that person for sue the person at fault for the lost value of your family member. Okay? Those are wrongful death lawsuits. They often use this human capital approach to evaluating what that person's life was worth. So that's an example of where those numbers or where that calculation is appropriate. Now, a big question though is not what your life is worth to others, right? Because the limitations of the human capital approach are that it omits non-market value, okay? Like the love you get from your mother that she doesn't charge you for, and it omits the value of your life to yourself. Okay, which arguably is important, right? You put some value on your own life. Your life matters for reasons other than your contribution to society. You like yourself. Okay, so this is a big one. So, how can we calculate the value of your life to yourself? Okay, how much would you be willing to pay to save your own life? Okay, now this is a tough question. Uh, what is the thought experiment? Well, I could suggest maybe you are going to die unless you get some life-saving medical treatment. What is the most that you would be willing to pay for that treatment? Or someone is holding a gun to your head, and is going to kill you unless you pay them some money, what's the most you would pay? Your answer is probably pretty simple. What is your answer? How much would you pay to save your own life in one of those situations? You pay, how about everything you've got? Yeah, okay. Does anyone really disagree with that? I think that's a sensible answer. But it's not a good thought experiment, because the problem with that is the money doesn't have value to you when you're dead. So you're talking about trading your life for something that would otherwise be worthless. That money's worthless when you're dead. You can't take it with you. So, okay. So that kind of thought experiment doesn't work well. So maybe we can try something slightly different. What would you pay to reduce the risk of dying? Okay, which is the same thing as what you would accept to increase the risk of dying. And again, what you would pay to reduce your risk of dying, what you would accept to increase your risk of dying, those two things are the same. Okay, all right, so think about this question of how much money would you accept to take on a risk of dying? And I suggest the thought experiment of playing a game of Russian roulette. Okay, Russian roulette is a hypothetical game that gives you a 1 in 6 chance of dying. Okay, supposedly 100 years ago, Russian army officers would get bored during long Russian winters and play this game to entertain themselves. They'd take a revolver with 6 chambers in it for bullets, put a bullet in one of them, spin the what is it called? Oh, spin the chambers to randomize whether the loaded bullet whether the bullet actually gets loaded, and there's a 1 in 6 chance that it is. Then hold the gun to the person's head, pull the trigger, 1 in 6 chance of dying. Okay, and 5 in 6 chance of getting a bunch of money from your buddies. Okay, how much would you accept? Okay, to take on a 1 in 6 chance of dying? Okay, reflect on this for a moment. And just think to yourself, would you do it for $100,000? 1 in 6 chance you get $100,000. That's, a really nice car, like a super nice car, 2 pretty nice cars. It's a portion of a house. And 5 in 6 chance of getting that, 1 in 6 chance of dying. Would you do it? Think about that. What if it's $500,000? Okay, $500,000. Now we're talking about 5 in 6 chance you have a really nice house. 1 in 6 chance you die. Okay. Or $1 million. Super nice house. 5 in 6 chance of that. $2 million. Now you're talking about a life of luxury. 5 in 6 chance of getting that versus 1 in 6 chance of dying. Okay. What would you do? And maybe think about this for a minute and then write down your answer. I'd like to force you all, and this includes people on Zoom, really think about this and what your answer would be. Okay? I'm going to tell you, your answer is not allowed to be infinite. I would never accept that bet. If you were attending college in person during a COVID pandemic, you've accepted some risk of dying in exchange for not delaying your earnings by a year. Okay, not delaying getting into the workforce for a year. I mean, heck, if you've ever gotten in a car and driven somewhere, you've accepted a risk of dying in exchange for whatever you got from that trip. Okay, so your answer cannot be, I would never accept that bet. The other answer that you can't give is, I would do it for free. Okay, please don't give me that answer. If you do have that answer, talk to me. Okay. Oh, so you have a number in your mind? Now I'm curious about what your numbers are. $500,000? Would anyone do it for $500,000? 1 million? 2? What? Hmm? Right, except a 1 in 6 chance of dying for $1,000,000, 5 in 6 chance of getting the money. Okay, got 1, 2, 3. Okay, 2 million. Okay, 3 million, 4, 5. $5 million? That's a nice life. Okay, 10. Okay, got at least one more person at 10. 20. Okay, who's holding out for lots of money? Okay, how much? 100 million. Okay. Um. Yeah, Stephanie. Yeah, more than likely, yeah. I mean, a really good chance you're going to get the money. A substantial but small chance that you'll die. Um, so Stephanie, Stephanie had a lower value. Not necessarily saying 100 million is wrong. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and so I'm a little bit skeptical about whether your behavior is consistent with with that, but you can provide that answer, and it's something that in some ways you do have to make these decisions, and yeah, you do take on these risks when you get in a car and drive to your friend's house. You face some chance of dying, some elevated chance of dying in exchange for some fun. Okay, so we do in fact make these decisions all the time. If you say that your life is infinitely valuable, you would, well, if your life were infinitely valuable, you would just live in a protective bubble, and that's not where we are right now. Okay, now, so the answer is most people behave as if they would accept this kind of bet for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500,000. Oh, sorry, 500,000 to $2 million. Okay, most people, the average person. This is something that economists try to study by observing behavior and observing the behavior of people who work in risky jobs and the premiums that are paid for accepting risky jobs. So, again, studied by observing the premiums that workers receive for accepting risky jobs. Okay. There is or was a TV show with the name like World's Deadliest Catch. Yeah. This is the one about the Alaskan fishers, crab fishers, and other fishers. Uh, William, you're nodding as if William, correct? What? Justin, I'm so sorry. Justin, you're nodding as if you've seen this. Yeah. And am I right about that this is like crab fishers and so forth? Okay. And fishing is, in fact, one of the most dangerous jobs in the U.S. Okay. Why do these fishers accept dangerous jobs? Because they pay well. They can make $30,000 or $50,000 over a period of a few weeks during a good season. That's great money, okay? But it comes with the risk of dying. So everything else the same. Workers get paid more in dangerous jobs, and it is very like it is essentially a game of Russian roulette to accept a job working in dangerous working conditions. Um, so, as I said, most people behave as if they would accept that kind of bet for about $500,000 to $2 million. I'm not surprised that young people with promising futures would likely value their lives above that. Again, this is sort of what the average person, think of a middle-aged working class person accepts bets like this for this value. Then based on this, we can come up with the value of a life. If you think of a group, okay, let's suppose that a group of 6 people accept a 1 in 6 chance of dying, and they get compensated, let's say $1 million each. Okay. Then we can infer from that as a group, the group receives $6 million, and the group gives up 1 life. Right? A group of 6 people has given up, at least on average, statistically speaking, has given up 1 life. Okay. So that indicates that 1 life is equal to $6 million. And realize this is the value that people are placing on their own lives. Like these fishers who accept dangerous jobs for higher pay, they are exchanging their own risk of dying, and they're indicating what they value their lives at. Okay, and this calculation based on observing risks of dying is known as a statistical value of life. Okay, in some ways, it's a value of a chance of giving up my own life. Okay, now it's not my life for certain. That's where the kind of statistical comes in. It's sort of indicating that as a group, this is what we're willing to pay. Now, this is actually useful for making decisions about, like, what should society pay, what should society pay to save the life of one of its members, life of one random member. Okay, that's the decision that these, say, 6 people playing Russian roulette made. This group of 6 people, what they would be willing to accept to give up the life of one of their members chosen at random. So when we observe these, like, behaviors, people accepting jobs that mimic Russian roulette, they reveal what they themselves are paying or willing to accept. And so that gives us a way of answering this question. Now, I used an example here with $6 million. Um, that is just for the sake of an example. What studies show is that people in the US, the average American, values their own life somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $10 million. The studies come up with different results. This is not a nice, clean science. But often, studies show that it's in the neighborhood of around $3 million. Okay. People behave as if we value a life around $3 million. These types of numbers actually get used by organizations like the Environmental Protection Agency. When it evaluates the cost effectiveness of anti-pollution programs. Now, so an anti-pollution program will cost a bunch of money or, like, result in a lot of economic damage, but it'll save a few lives. What is worthwhile? Well, we as a society who are benefiting from the cleaner air or cleaner water, cleaner environment, we're paying a cost to save the lives of some random members of our group. And so it seems that these, like, values that come from observing people's work behaviors are appropriate to apply in those cases. The EPA uses a value of $9 million. To establish if something is cost effective. Okay. These numbers are also used for highway safety. And I believe it's the case that the National Transportation Safety Board, these are the people who do things like investigate airplane crashes, train wrecks, highway accidents, and suggest safety improvements. They also use something in the neighborhood of around $9 million. Okay, so just to give you an idea, like, we do need to make these decisions. Like, we as a society need to make these decisions, and the government does make these decisions. And they do use value of life calculations that are in part informed by people's observed behavior. Okay, now we can get into some more complicated things, some subtleties. Medical care. Okay. As I said, that those numbers of like those numbers I just gave for the value of a statistical life are kind of an average random member of society. When it comes to medical care, decisions about is it cost effective to do such and such to extend a person's life, those are not so generic as, or like we know more about the person than simply a random person driving down this road, or a random passenger on an airplane, or a random person breathing in the air. Do you get how like that sort of like those? There are some decisions where the safety is going to impact a random member of society, but other decisions like medical care, we know more about the person whose life will be saved. Okay, so um, okay, medical care. So, if you're going to be sensible about medical care and how much you should pay for medical care, what kinds of things would you think about? Whose lives should we be willing to pay more for? Does that make sense? Or even when it comes to COVID, I suppose that's another thing that I could bring up. Like we could think about, or we could calculate the cost effectiveness of COVID lockdowns. They saved lives, but but they were not like random members of society whose lives were at risk, were they? It wasn't so much you all whose lives were at risk, but whose lives were at risk. What was the like main risk factor for dying from COVID? Come on, you know this, right? Older people, right? Exactly. Okay, especially the really old. Yeah, this is something where the risk of dying increased rapidly as people get over a certain age. Okay, so it's older people. Are their lives worth as much? I mean, come on, we're economists here. No, okay, why not? They have less time to live. Okay, Stephanie, are you going to say old people are worth as much as young people? You look like you were about to put up your.
I think it goes back to that situational conversation we were having about like emotional connection and how that influences our decisions. Because I think if it's like your grandparent, you would feel differently than saying, no, it's fine, we can kill off all the old people just to save the young people.
Yeah. Okay. So what you're bringing up is that emotional connection and the fact it depends on who. And if it's your own grandparent, of course, it's different than some random person, someone else's grandparent. Absolutely, yes. But yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I also don't think that we have the power to decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die based on economic resources.
Okay, you believe that we don't have the power to decide who should live and who should die based on economic resources. Stephanie, I admire you are very smart and very moral, but I disagree with that. We've got to make decisions. Okay? Two people, like there are two people who could possibly die. They are identical in all regards except age. Do we save the old person or do we save the young person? Yeah.
But I think looking at it from that perspective, why is it if when the vaccine rollout started, we get it to old people first if we think young people's lives are ruined. Like, it's that both sides of that situation, and I think we as a society cannot look at two people and say, okay, you lived your life, cool, you can die now, and this person needs to live their life. I think that person can make that decision of, oh, I'm 88, don't try to save me because it's more important for you to allocate these resources to someone else. But I don't think we have the power or the, like, moral capabilities to be like, you're old, you can die.
Okay, so Stephanie, you are making good arguments, and I could argue with you all day long. I would kind of love to argue with you about this all day long. Um, uh, it is a difficult question, and everything you said is true about, like, and you brought up, why did we save old people with COVID? You know, as a matter of fact, this is something that my wife and I have discussed, and you know, and maybe it was a mistake. There's this phenomenon called long COVID. The people who have like ongoing, especially middle-aged people who have health problems half a year or a year after COVID, substantial neurological, like brain impairments, heart damage. You know, young kids and young adults who have permanent heart damage. Well, sorry, year-long heart damage. And could it have been a mistake to prioritize saving lives instead of prevent, like, you know, should we save the life of a person who has 2 years left, or should we prevent someone from having 60 years of lingering effects of COVID? What is the better way to use the vaccine? Do you get the question?
I get the question, but my problem with it is I don't think we can sit in this room and say, I don't think we have any authority in any manner to say that someone's life doesn't matter as much as someone else just because they only have 2 years to live. I think that if we bring up someone in this classroom's grandfather or grandparent, and we then are using that example, I think it changes it completely. But why don't we look at that as a structural perspective? Because if we're just going to be selfish and think about our own, like, family in that sense, like, I don't think that's morally right. I think we have to look at, like, oh, that is someone else's grandparent, and that person has that same connection. We don't have the moral capabilities or even the power or hierarchy in any way to be like, okay, you only have 2 years left to live, you deserve to die, but someone who still doesn't have their taste or smell back after a year of having it being a year since they have COVID, we shouldn't allocate resources to help them yet because we're still healthy. Like, we don't have the moral capabilities to say we should help one person over the other. We don't have that power. Each person can make that decision for themselves, but I don't think as a society we get to dictate who gets to live and who gets to die. That's kind of what they did in, like, communism and in Nazi Germany. That's not what we do in a democracy. That's not what we do in a productive society.
So, I mean, again, you're raising good points, and I regret that people on Zoom might not be able to hear these points. You know, you're and you're raising questions about the morality of comparing, say, 2 years live or 2 years of life for one person to a lifetime of disability. How, like, we can't say, or we don't have the moral authority to say which of those is more important. But I would argue, as a practical matter, we have to make decisions. We have those two people in front of us. There's a 20-year-old who could have a year of could have a lifetime of heart problems, or an 80-year-old with 2 years left. Who gets the vaccine? We have to make those decisions. Yeah.
But why are we responsible for that decision? Why isn't the person who is getting the vaccine responsible for that decision? Shouldn't it be technically on the old person then to say no, give it to the young person?
Should it be up to the old person to say no, give it to the young person? Shouldn't this be something that's done with their consent? And what if it's the government has paid for a vaccine and the government owns it, but the government's trying to decide whom to prioritize?
I think that goes back to my point of communism and Nazi Germany.
Okay.
I think that goes back to
Wasn't Nazi Germany fascist?
No, right. Fascism, communism, totalitarianism. Totalitarian governments make those types of decisions. And that's not the way that we want American society to be. And yeah. So, Stephanie, I agree with everything you're saying, but I can argue against it. Do you understand with that perspective? And I hope that the same is true for you. You understand the points I'm making, but you can argue with them. Oh, Justin, were you going to say something, or William? Okay. Sorry. Okay. So let me suggest a couple other measures that might be appropriate for medical care, especially. Okay, one is life years. Okay, think about how many years of life we are saving. And so when it comes to the vaccine, for example, think of administering it in a way that maximizes the number of years of life that are saved. When it comes to medical treatment, should society be willing to pay as much to save the life of a youngster for 70 years, or to, let me say, extend the life of a youngster by 70 years, or to extend the life of an old person by 2 years? And one suggestion is perhaps we should measure, or we should think about not the value of a life as always being the same, but put a dollar amount on the value of a year of life. Okay, and I'll say this is what Medicare does, and then following the example of Medicare, private insurance companies do as well. Okay, Medicare will pay $50,000 to extend a person's life by a year. I think that is a number they formally use. So when we think about some type of surgery to extend a person's life, the surgery costs $200,000 and it extends a person's life by 5 years. Is it worthwhile? Medicare would apply this criterion and say yes. 5 years of life are worth $250,000. If the surgery costs $200,000, it's worthwhile. Okay, and as I said, private insurance companies follow this example. Okay, so again, these are called life years. Instead of just talking about the value of the life, assess the value of the years of life that are saved. And another refinement is called a quality adjusted life year. Okay. That, for example, extending a person's life by a year when that person has other medical conditions that reduce their quality of life. For example, a person with severe dementia, an older person with severe dementia who may be largely unaware of their surroundings. Is it worth as much to extend the life of that person? Um, this gets into something that's called a quality adjusted life year. So, and also, this is used in assessing things like um, medical treatments that don't save life but reduce disability. Because again, there's this example of long COVID. Um, okay, long COVID is a condition that is not well understood, but there are people who have at least 6 months, a year of ongoing COVID symptoms. Some of these people have symptoms that have not resolved, including things like confusion, fatigue, and other mental or neurological deficits, um, heart problems. Um, what else? I could go on. Uh, but long-term consequences of COVID. Now, if we're thinking about how to prioritize medical treatment or how much to pay for medical treatment, we might think about, or instead of just thinking about number of years of life that we are providing a person, um, one this idea of quality adjusted life year provides two refinements. One is not all years of life are equal. Also, it's worth improving the quality of life. It's worth avoiding disabilities. And again, my wife in public health has a problem with the idea that young kids can go back to school because they are at low risk of dying from COVID. Yes, that's true, but they are at risk of having health problems that stay with them throughout their lives and could result in a lower quality of life for a long period of time. Okay, so final, the bottom line here is I want you all to be aware of maybe three important concepts for value of life. One is the human capital approach. Okay, as a way of capturing the value of a person's life to others in society. There is also the value of a statistical life, which is a reflection of how much people value the life of one person in their group. But essentially, it's the value of a person's life to themselves. And then there are these life years, and in particular, quality adjusted life years. Okay? We economists believe in these things, and we believe that we have to make these decisions. And Stephanie, I absolutely respect your arguments. And but I'm going to say that they are tough moral questions, and instead of like shying away from them, um, uh, we have to pretend that, or we have to maybe force ourselves to answer them, come up with some way of solving those problems of how to determine how much to spend on a life and compare who gets treatment and who doesn't. Okay. So I enjoy this topic. Um, I have another topic. I don't know if I can get through all of this next topic today, but it's another interesting one. Okay. Inequality. Okay. Inequality in income, wealth, resources, and then redistribution of wealth. Okay. So some people are wealthy, some people are not. Here I have my nice billionaire lighting his cigar with money, and here's my working class person who is not so fantastically wealthy. And okay, so there is inequality, And one of the roles of government traditionally has been redistribution of wealth. So, okay, in fact, classic argument for the role of the government. Okay, this is a general statement. I think many political philosophers recognize that governments have four important purposes. One is protection of rights. Okay. Okay. Protection of rights, including property rights. Another is intervening in market failures. Okay, so things like externalities. Okay, and a third, so market failures, which include externalities, to be clear, and things, many laws might be viewed as preventing externalities. A law against littering, or maybe a law against violence. Now, this is where one person's behavior impacts someone who's not consenting. Okay, and a third is redistribution. The role of the government in redistributing resources is ancient. The governments of ancient Egypt played an important role in redistributing wealth across Egypt. And this is something that is referred to now as a palace economy. So we're going back 5,000 years. Before the days of markets, when people felt that they had private ownership of their goods, that they worked for cash, and they sold their goods, um, the, the people of ancient Egypt would grow their crops, send their crops off to the pharaoh's palace, and then the pharaoh would divide up the crops again and send them out to the people. Okay, so there's this role of the central government in redistributing wealth. And by the way, it's not necessarily a bad thing to redistribute, because think of the security that it provides people. Your um, your region might have a drought this year and a surplus of crops the following year. Okay, it might go back and forth. Well, you're going to have people starving during the years of drought and then have more than they need to eat during the years of plenty. But if you take multiple regions, this can average out. One region will have a drought or shortage, another region will have a surplus. They both send all their food to the central palace, gets divided up fairly and sent back to them, and it protects lives during the years of drought or during the years of shortage. Okay, so there was an important role served by redistribution. Okay, that's maybe one of the roles of redistribution. And so I'm going to talk about some arguments for and against redistribution of wealth. Sound good? Okay. So let's start with these arguments in favor. Okay. Why should governments redistribute wealth? And the first I've mentioned is a form of insurance. Social insurance. That everyone experiences some years of plenty, some years of, of hardship, and the government can help even that out by transferring money from the wealthy to the poor. Okay, Does that argument make sense? When I talk about redistribution, there are many ways that the government does this. Some of the ways the government redistributes are by taxing different people or different groups of people differently. Like wealthy people get taxed a higher fraction of their income, and so wealthier people pay more in tax, but then everyone in society sort of equally benefits from public goods. That's a form of redistribution. Um, uh, for example, right now, the government surplus checks that are going out are direct cash payments. And if the government pays $1,000 to each family, but it collects more tax revenue from wealthy families than from poor families, this means that the poorer families will experience a net gain in money from these stimulus checks, whereas the wealthy families will experience a net loss, right? They get the check, but they have to pay increased taxes. And so it's a net loss for them. So that's a form of redistribution, and that's redistribution through the tax code. Um, Other forms are like payments to people, food stamps, housing assistance. Uh, let's see. So, and some are through policies that benefit less fortunate people, giving, like, well, and it's not necessarily the government, but think universities will provide lower tuition to people who are economically disadvantaged. It's a form of redistribution. Okay, so let's see. So one argument for redistribution is it serves a role as social insurance. And unemployment benefits, for example, are like literally called unemployment insurance by the government. And the way unemployment benefits work are if you lose a job through no fault of your own, then the government will give you a check for a period of time. Okay? It's supposed to be a way of kind of redistributing from workers in years when they have jobs to workers in years when they don't have jobs, or in periods when they do have jobs to periods when they don't. Okay, so here's a social insurance argument. Another argument is that maybe redistribution is a public good. Okay, there are a couple of ways that this might be true. One is that we might all prefer to live in a society where people are not hungry or poor. That's part of the public good argument. Um, so we just like the idea of a society that is equal. Um, Another might be things like violence and social unrest. Like, inequality between the poor and wealthy makes people unhappy. Inequality in the way people are treated results in, rioting and other and social unrest, right? Um, so so you know, so there's this like form of like public good. It just serves people directly. It makes society, or well, sorry, like the violence and social unrest. Also, I mean, property crime is taking money, usually like robbery, is taking money from wealthy people by poor people. The more inequality there is, the bigger the opportunities for robbery, right? So um, both the gains from robbery as well as like the need by poor people to rob. So reducing inequality might cut down on crimes, and then again, it's a public good sort of argument. Okay, good on these things? Okay, now I'm going through these entirely too quickly. A third argument is called the utilitarian argument, okay, or utilitarianism. Think of utility as meaning the usefulness. Okay, it's a term that economists and philosophers or political philosophers use to describe the usefulness of something, its utility. And the idea is that a dollar has more value to a poor person than to a wealthy person. Okay? So, or it starts with this idea that money has more value to poor people than to wealthy people. That seems likely, right? Um, and or has more value, bring more value, more utility, more usefulness, creates more happiness for a poor person than for a rich person. Therefore, redistributing from people with low utility, in other words, the wealthy, to people with high utility, the poor, increases the total utility in society. Okay, so this is the basic argument. Again, it's a utilitarian argument for redistribution. Utilitarianism is an idea in philosophy, and it carries over into politics and economics, that that we can measure the value of money or any resource to people, and that the objective of the government should be to maximize utility in society. Okay, and so in order to do that, like take money from the wealthy who have little value to the money, right? Think of my cartoon of the billionaire lighting his cigar with a dollar bill. Okay, the humor of that image, right? You've seen that before. The humor of that image is that the money has so little value to the billionaire that the billionaire might as well just use it to light a cigar. Okay? But the same money might have great value to someone who is poor. And so to take away $100,000 from Jeff Bezos is something he would never miss. It would bring him no sadness. But then to give 10 families $10,000, 10 poor families $10,000, would bring happiness or would bring benefit to those 10 poor families. Okay? So it seems like if we want to improve the happiness of society, take the money from the person who has little value and give it to the people who have higher value. That's the utilitarian argument. Got it? Okay. So another argument is one of social justice. Okay. And I like an idea that comes from the philosopher John Rawls, who says, imagine that we have to make decisions imagine making decisions for society without knowing who we will be. In other words, we could be born poor, we could be born rich. We could be born male, we could be born female, we could be born of any ethnicity or race. Okay, so he calls this behind the veil of ignorance. Okay, and then Rawls says, in order to decide what is just for society, what is fair for society, what would we pick from behind the veil of ignorance? And then that's the thing that we should strive for in society. So it might be easy for us, if we're wealthy, to say we oppose redistribution. Or if we're poor, to say we like redistribution. Um, we would want more redistribution. But Rawls would say, forget that. Think about what would you want if you don't know who you're going to be. Would you favor a society that redistributes or not? Okay, and this position can be applied to any ethical question. You know, if we were to think about, um, uh, let's say, abortion rights, you know, it different people in society have different reactions to abortion based on their own circumstances. Me, as a middle-aged man, how will abortion impact me? It's very different from, you know, a young woman, right? And to be honest, it's easy. It's super easy for me to tell people, don't abort babies or fetuses. It's easy for me to say that, right? Where's the cost? I don't incur the cost. Um, but Rawls would say, think about this from behind the veil of ignorance. You could be born male, you could be born female, you could be born affluent, you could be born poor, you could be born of any race, ethnicity. What would you want for society? Um, okay. Now, again, this Rawlsian perspective can be applied to any issue. And by the way, I would acknowledge that the way I would react to abortion rights from behind the veil of ignorance would certainly be different, just because I am forced to take into account the other perspectives, right? Just for that simple reason, um, uh, I would make different decisions for my own self in my own situation right now than I would if I were reflecting on I could be anyone. And Rawls says the thing that society should select is what you would pick, or the thing that you should want for society is what you would pick from behind the veil of ignorance. Okay, now combine this with the utilitarian argument. Um, would justify redistribution. Okay, as I was doodling images that I could put into a lecture, those the stupid cartoons figures you saw earlier, I was starting with the idea of like the millionaire, billionaire lighting the cigar with his uh, dollar bill, to illustrate this idea essentially of utilitarianism, that the money has little or less value to a wealthy person. Then I realized, I can draw a picture of that same person just with a working class background. And, this is like Rawls' ideas. Like, you could imagine you could be born working class, you could be born wealthy. Would you support policies that do whatever, redistribute wealth? And if it's true that I have a 50-50 chance of becoming the millionaire or the poor working class person. Do I think, would I choose to make the billionaire a little bit poorer and give that money to the working class person to have fewer money concerns? My answer is yes, I would support that. And again, sort of redistributing from myself in one scenario to myself in another scenario. Would I support that type of redistribution? And based on the idea of utilitarianism, I'd say yes. Okay, so I think I'm out of time for today. I've quickly gone through these arguments in favor of redistribution. I've got a handful of arguments against redistribution. I wish I could talk about this for a week, but I'm out of time, so I'll end. Oh,